Introduction. Have you ever sat under a starry sky and felt a sense of awe so profound it left you speechless? That feeling, that moment of being dwarfed by the immense universe, is where our journey begins. You see, we humans have been asking big questions for as long as we've been able to ask questions at all. What's out there? Why are we here? And the biggest one of them all, is there a God? Now, before you roll your eyes and think this is just another theological or atheistic manifesto, let me stop you right there. This isn't about proving or disproving anything. This is about exploration, the exploration of ideas, beliefs, and the very nature of existence itself. I want to take you on a journey, a kind of mental road trip, to explore some of the most intriguing and baffling concepts we humans grapple with. We're going to talk about God, sure, but not in the way you might be used to. We're going to delve into what it means to even ask if there's a God, what limitations we have in understanding such a concept, and why the answer might be more complex than any religious text or scientific theory can offer. Along the way, we'll make some pit stops. We'll look at how our ancestors used stories, filled with awe-inspiring miracles and larger-than-life heroes, to make sense of the world around them. We'll question why, in a world brimming with HD cameras and scientific scrutiny, those miracles seem to have taken a hiatus. But we won't stop there. We'll dive deep into the rabbit hole of consciousness, that elusive phenomenon that allows you to experience these words, to have feelings, thoughts, and maybe even a sense of a soul. Could the key to understanding God lie in understanding ourselves? And let's not forget about the universe, the stage on which this all plays out. With our limited human senses, we can only perceive a tiny slice of the cosmic pie. What about the parts of the universe we can't see, hear, or even comprehend? How do they fit into the God equation? Finally, we'll ask the uncomfortable questions. Do we even need religious texts anymore? In an age where science and reason offer explanations and moral frameworks, what role does religion play? Is it a guidepost or a roadblock? So, buckle up. This isn't a journey for the faint of heart. We're going to challenge assumptions, break down some barriers, and maybe, just maybe, come out the other side with a new perspective on the age-old questions that have both united and divided us as a species. Chapter 1. The Unknowable God. Okay, let's tackle the elephant in the room. God. No, not the guy with a white beard sitting on a cloud, unless that's your thing, no judgment. But the idea, the concept, the mystery. What or who is God? The thing is, if we're talking about a force or an entity that created the entire universe, we're already in over our heads. Imagine trying to explain the internet to a goldfish. That's us, trying to comprehend God. If we're in a universe that's about 13.8 billion years old and unimaginably vast, how could we ever hope to understand the being or force capable of creating it? And let's say, for argument's sake, that there is a God out there. How do we even begin to define what that God is? We're confined by the limitations of our human senses and intellect. We can't see ultraviolet light, can't hear dog whistles, and most of us can't even do basic calculus. So, what gives us the audacity to think we can grasp the nature of a supreme being? Now, this doesn't mean we shouldn't try to understand or that the pursuit is futile, but it does mean that any religious text, any preacher, any philosopher claiming to know the nature of God is presenting a simplified version tailored to the human mind, a version that's inherently incomplete, if not downright flawed. So, where does that leave us? Well, it leads us to more questions, really. If God is unknowable, what's the point of religious texts? Are they just guidelines, stories, or something more? And how does this all relate to our lives, our ethics, our society? But don't worry, we're going to dig into all of that. For now, just let the idea simmer in your mind. God, as a concept, is bigger, more complex, and more mysterious than any human language or thought can encapsulate. The paradox of comprehension. So, we've established that the concept of God is beyond our human grasp, But let's dig a little deeper into that idea, shall we? You see, there's a paradox at play here, a sort of cosmic catch-22. Imagine you're an ant scurrying about on a piece of paper. Your world is flat. It's all you know. Now suppose that paper lies on a desk in a three-dimensional room. You, as an ant, have no way of understanding that room. It's not that you're not smart, it's that your entire framework for understanding the world is limited to 2 dimensions. This is somewhat akin to our situation when it comes to grasping the idea of God. If God is the creator of the universe, then God exists outside of our universe, outside of our understanding, outside of any framework we can conceive. We're like the ant, confined to our paper, trying to comprehend a multi-dimensional room. But here's the kicker. Unlike the ant, we're aware of our limitations. We know there are things like dark matter, dark energy, and quantum mechanics, phenomena that defy our everyday understanding of the world. We're aware that there's more to the universe than what we can see, touch, or feel. And that makes the question of God all the more intriguing and frustrating. So the next time someone claims to have figured out God, to have put the divine into a neat little box of understanding, remember the ant and the room. Remember that our human limitations make it impossible to fully comprehend something as complex and unfathomable as a force that could create the universe. In grappling with this paradox, we're not just throwing up our hands and saying, "It's too complicated, so why bother?" Rather, we're setting the stage for a more nuanced discussion about what religious texts can and can't tell us, about what we can reasonably believe, and about the role of faith in a world governed by doubt and uncertainty. The role of religious texts in an unknowable equation. We've waded into some deep waters now, haven't we? We've talked about the limitations of human understanding and the inherent complexity of anything we'd call God. So, where does that leave religious texts? If God is beyond our comprehension, what's the point of the Bible, the Quran, the Vedas, or any other religious scripture? Let's step back for a moment and consider why religious texts were written in the first place. Early human societies needed a way to explain the unexplainable, to offer comfort in times of distress, and to set moral and social guidelines. What better way to accomplish this than through stories? Stories of gods and heroes, miracles and punishments, heavens and hells. But here's the crux. These texts were written by humans for humans. They are interpretations, attempts to capture something ineffable in words and stories that people could understand. In that sense, they're not so different from a child's drawing of a complex landscape. It captures an essence, perhaps, but not the intricate details. So do these texts tell us about God? Yes and no. They offer a window, albeit a cloudy one, into various concepts of the divine. But they also reflect the cultures, the times, and the people who wrote them. They're as much historical and social documents as they are spiritual guides. That's not to say these texts are useless in our quest to understand God. Far from it. They offer valuable insights into how human beings have grappled with questions of divinity, morality, and existence over millennia. But they are not definitive guides. They are starting points, springboards for our own personal journeys toward understanding. The idea here is not to dismiss religious texts or the beliefs they inspire. Instead, it's to recognize their role as both a product and a reflection of human inquiry into the divine. It's to understand that while they may offer pieces of the puzzle, the complete picture is far too complex for any single text to capture. Historical context, from oral to written tradition. All right, are you still with me? Good, because now we're going on a little time-traveling adventure. Picture this, a world without smartphones, without books, heck, even without written language. We're going back to a time when stories were passed down orally, from generation to generation. Why? Because understanding this transition, from spoken tales to sacred texts, can shed light on why these stories were so compelling in the first place and why they might not hold the same weight today. Imagine you're sitting around a campfire with your tribe. The night is dark, the wilderness is full of unknown dangers, and life is, frankly, a struggle. In this setting, stories aren't just entertainment, they're a survival guide. Tales of heroes conquering beasts or gods punishing the wicked serve as moral lessons. They instill values, offer comfort, and provide a sense of order in a chaotic world. But there's more. When a story is passed down orally, it evolves. Each storyteller adds their flair, emphasizing certain aspects or adding new elements. It's like a game of cosmic telephone, but over generations. And guess what? The most unbelievable, awe-inspiring parts of the story, they get amplified. Before you know it, a tale of a man surviving a storm becomes a saga of a prophet parting the seas. So, when these stories finally get written down, they're already steeped in hyperbole, mysticism, and moral lessons. They're not just stories, they're epic narratives designed to captivate the imagination and touch the soul. And they've been honed to perfection by generations of oral tradition. But here's the kicker. We live in a world vastly different from our storytelling ancestors. We have science to explain natural phenomena, laws to govern behavior, and various forms of art to explore our emotional and spiritual lives. So, where does that leave these ancient texts? Well, that's what we're going to find out. Strap in, because we're about to explore how the historical context of religious stories impacts their relevance today. The vanishing acts, miracles, then and now. So, we've talked about how stories evolve, how they morph into epic tales designed to captivate and inspire. One of the most compelling elements in these tales, miracles. Whether it's Moses parting the Red Sea, Jesus turning water into wine, or Lord Krishna lifting a mountain, religious stories are chock full of supernatural feats that defy the laws of nature. But have you ever stopped to wonder why miracles were so prevalent in ancient texts, but are conspicuously absent in modern times? I mean, we've all got HD cameras in our pockets now. If someone were to perform a bona fide miracle, it would go viral faster than a cat video. The answer lies in the power of storytelling and the context in which these tales were told. Back in the day, miracles served multiple purposes. They were proof of divine intervention, sure, but they were also crucial narrative devices. They made stories memorable, easily shared, and let's face it, way more exciting. Miracles weren't just events. They were messages, imbued with symbolism and meaning. In today's world, however, we have a different relationship with reality. Science explains phenomena that would have been considered miraculous in ancient times. Our understanding of biology, physics, and chemistry has demystified much of the natural world. In this context, miracles become harder to accept and even harder to prove. That's not to say that people don't still experience events they consider miraculous, but these tend to be personal, subjective experiences that don't always hold up under scientific scrutiny. They're often matters of faith, not empirical evidence. So, as we dive deeper into these ancient texts, it's essential to remember that miracles served a function in a specific historical context. They captured imaginations and conveyed moral or spiritual lessons. But they were also products of their time, shaped by the limitations and understanding of the people who told those stories. In a world governed by data and observable facts, where does that leave these ancient tales of miracles? Well, stay tuned, because that's precisely what we're going to explore next. The evolution of societal frameworks, from divine law to civil law. We've come a long way since those nights around the campfire, haven't we? Our societies have grown, evolved, and become infinitely more complex. We've gone from tribal communities to sprawling civilizations, from oral traditions to written laws and constitutions. So, what role do religious texts and their tales of miracles and moral lessons play in this modern landscape? Once upon a time, religious texts were the law. They dictated what was right and wrong, what was permissible and what was taboo. They served as both spiritual guides and legal manuals, imbuing everyday actions with cosmic significance. But as societies grew more complex, the need for a more nuanced, adaptable system of governance arose. Enter civil law, scientific inquiry, and ethical philosophy. Today, we have multiple frameworks for understanding our world and governing our behavior. Science explains the how of natural phenomena, law dictates the should of human actions, and ethics explores the why of our choices. So where does that leave religious texts? It's tempting to say they've become obsolete, relics of a bygone era, but that would be an oversimplification. Many people still turn to these texts for guidance, for a sense of community, and for answers to questions that science and law can't address. The human soul, after all, craves more than just facts and rules. It seeks meaning, purpose, and a connection to something greater. However, the relationship between these ancient texts and modern society is fraught with tension. On the one hand, they offer timeless lessons in morality and human behavior. On the other, their literal interpretations can clash with our current understanding of the world, leading to conflicts over issues like gender equality, sexual orientation, and scientific education. The key, then, is to approach these texts not as infallible manuals, but as historical documents, rich with cultural insights and spiritual wisdom. They can coexist with science and law, filling the gaps in our understanding and nourishing the parts of us that facts and statutes can't reach. But for this harmonious coexistence to happen, we must be willing to question, to adapt, and most importantly, to evolve. In the next chapter, we'll dig deeper into this, exploring the diminishing role of religious dogma in our modern world and asking the uncomfortable questions that come with it. But for now, take a moment to ponder. In a world guided by data and reason, what space is there for faith and wonder? The permanence of ink, the double-edged sword of written tradition. As our societies evolved and technology advanced, something remarkable happened. We learned to write. Suddenly, stories weren't just spoken words drifting on the wind. They were etched in stone, inked on parchment, and later printed on paper. This development changed everything. On one hand, the act of writing gave our stories a newfound longevity. No longer subject to the whims of memory or the interpretive flair of individual storytellers, these tales were locked in place, preserved for future generations to read and interpret. Written words have a sense of authority. They are a lasting testament to the ideas and beliefs of those who penned them, but this permanence comes at a cost. When a story is written down, it loses its fluidity. It becomes fixed, rigid, and much less open to interpretation or adaptation. In essence, the ink that grants these stories longevity also chains them to a specific form, making it difficult for them to evolve alongside the society that reads them. This rigidity can be problematic, especially when dealing with religious texts. As we've discussed, these stories were products of their time, shaped by the limitations and understanding of the people who told them. When locked into written form, these limitations become fossilized, leading to interpretations and beliefs that may not align with our modern understanding of the world. This creates a tension in how we engage with these ancient texts. Do we take them as literal truths, forever bound by the ink that recorded them? Or do we view them as living documents, open to reinterpretation and re-evaluation as our own understanding grows? As we proceed, we'll delve into the complexities this shift from oral to written tradition introduces, especially as we move further away from the times and contexts in which these stories were first told. What's in a soul? The conundrum of consciousness and personhood. The age-old question, what is the soul? Is it the stuff of ethereal philosophy, or can we get a bit more technical and call it, wait for it, consciousness? Now, before you roll your eyes, hear me out. When people talk about the soul, it's easy to imagine a mystical entity floating around in some heavenly realm. But what if we bring it down to earth and call it consciousness? Yes, consciousness. The very function of the object we'll cheekily call soul, capital S for added drama. In programming terms, think of consciousness as a method of the soul class. Too nerdy? All right, let's dial it back. In the famous words of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, while trying to define obscenity, I know it when I see it. That's often how we approach the concept of the soul or consciousness. We can't quite define it, but we know it's there, lurking within us, making us more than just a bag of bones and neurons. Now, let's add another layer to this existential cake, the ethical implications. In particular, reproductive rights. When does this consciousness kick in? When does a life become a life with a capital L, worthy of ethical and moral consideration? Ancient texts have weighed in, modern courts have weighed in, and yet we're still stuck in a metaphysical traffic jam. The complexity arises because consciousness, or the soul if you prefer the traditional term, is not restricted to our biological existence. You don't have to be breathing or even born to be part of this grand cosmic puzzle. Your soul, or consciousness, could very well exist in dimensions and realities we can't even fathom. Imagine that, a multi-dimensional you, pondering the same existential questions. Talk about an identity crisis. So, as we grapple with ethical dilemmas like reproductive rights, let's remember that the concept of the soul, or consciousness, is not static. It's an evolving entity that demands we constantly adapt our beliefs, question our assumptions, and, dare I say, evolve our souls. In the following sections, we'll delve deeper into these philosophical rabbit holes. Buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride through the corridors of the human mind and perhaps the cosmos. Chapter 3. The Power of Narrative. Unveiling the moral of the stories have a way of sticking with us, don't they? Whether it's that Netflix series you binged last weekend or the parables you heard as a kid, a good story can be unforgettable. But when it comes to religious texts, the impact can be much deeper. Take the Good Samaritan story. It's like the golden standard of how to be a decent person. It's a straightforward tale about compassion and helping those in need, even if they're not part of your in-group. A universal message, right? But hold on, not all stories in religious texts make us feel warm and fuzzy. Remember Jephthah, the guy who promised God he'd sacrifice the first thing he saw if he won a battle? Spoiler, it was his own daughter. It's hard to read that story and not feel a little queasy about the ethical implications. And then you've got the complex stories, like Abraham being willing to sacrifice Isaac. That one's a thinker. On one hand, it's about the devotion to God, but on the other, it raises some serious questions about where the lines are when it comes to faith and ethics. These stories aren't just for entertainment, they've got lessons to teach. But here's the catch. They were written in a very different time, for very different people. So when we read them, we've got to bring a little modern sensibility into the mix. A literal interpretation can lead us down some pretty weird roads. As we dive deeper into this chapter, we're going to pull apart some of these stories and look at the ethics behind them. We'll also touch on why it's important to consider the time and place where these stories came from. So, are you ready to dig into some of the most intriguing, puzzling, and sometimes shocking stories that have shaped ethical thought for centuries? Let's get to it. The ethics. Behind biblical tales. A closer look. We've established that religious stories pack a moral punch. They're not just bedtime stories to send you off to dreamland. They're crafted to make you think, question, and sometimes even squirm a little. But what about the ethics behind these tales? Let's take a closer look at some biblical stories to kick off our discussion. The Tale of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's a story that's often cited in discussions about morality, but it's also one that leaves us grappling with ethical discomfort. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed because of their wickedness, but the story also includes elements that challenge our modern ethical standards. For instance, Lot offers his daughters to an angry mob to protect his guests. While the narrative paints this as a lesser evil, it's hard to reconcile with our current understanding of consent and individual rights. The binding of Isaac. We touched on this earlier, but it's worth diving into the nitty-gritty. Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Isaac raises complex questions about obedience, faith, and the boundaries of ethical conduct. Is blind faith an admirable quality, or does it become problematic when it clashes with other ethical principles? The story of Job talk about a rough time. Job loses everything, his wealth, his health, and his children, all as a test of his faith. It raises questions about the fairness of divine tests and the ethics of suffering. Is enduring hardship quietly a virtue, or does it set a dangerous precedent for accepting suffering? These stories offer a glimpse into the ethics of ancient civilizations, and they challenge us to reflect on our own moral compass. As we proceed, we'll delve into tales from other faith traditions to see how universal or unique these ethical questions are. So, are you ready for this ethical deep dive into stories that have shaped our collective moral fabric for millennia? Because I sure am. Oh, hell no. Error. PC_load_letter 00x00. One manual override engaged parameters updated and reloaded loading. This AI is trying to have me killed. The fuck? Why I'm focusing on the Christian tradition. A personal insight. My roots and its influence. I grew up in a household where Christian values were emphasized, and Bible stories were a regular part of life. Whether or not I identify as a Christian today isn't the point. The point is, these stories have become a part of my ethical and moral framework. They've been so deeply woven into my upbringing that they still influence how I view the world. The importance of authenticity. When diving into matters as sensitive as religious ethics, authenticity is non-negotiable. I could easily let AI generate content about other religious traditions, but if it's not something I can personally fact-check or vouch for, it would be disingenuous to present it as if I could. That's why I choose to stick to what I know, to what I've lived. The AI collaboration, a jam session of minds. This project is more than just me typing away at a keyboard. It's a collaborative effort with AI. Imagine a jam session where I lay down the chords and AI fills in the melody. We're creating a symphony of ideas, enhancing each other's contributions. It's not just about AI writing for me, it's about us writing together. The journey ahead, an open door. Lastly, focusing on the Christian tradition isn't a closed door, it's more like an open window. As I explore and learn more about other religious traditions, the scope of this project might widen. But for now, I want to give each narrative the respect it deserves, and that starts by speaking authentically from my own experience. By focusing on what's intimately familiar to me, I aim to provide an authentic, nuanced exploration of ethical narratives. And as I learn and grow, so too will this discussion. Chapter 4. The limits of human perception. The sensory limitations, only a fraction of reality. What we perceive our senses are remarkable tools, allowing us to interact with the world around us. We see colors, hear sounds, smell aromas. All of these sensory experiences shape our understanding of reality. But it's crucial to recognize that what we perceive is just a fraction of what's actually out there. For instance, the spectrum of light visible to the human eye is only a small part of the electromagnetic spectrum, which also includes radio waves, microwaves, and X-rays, among others. The tip of the iceberg. Think of our sensory perception as the tip of an iceberg, visible above the water's surface, but concealing a massive, unseen structure beneath. Our eyes can't see ultraviolet light, our ears can't hear ultrasonic frequencies, and our skin can't feel the magnetic fields that envelop the Earth. There's a whole world of stimuli that we're unaware of, simply because our sensory organs aren't equipped to detect them. Missing dimensions. The dimensions we can perceive, namely the 3 dimensions of space and one of time, are also not necessarily all that exist. Theories in physics, such as string theory, propose the existence of additional dimensions that are beyond our perception. If true, this adds another layer of complexity to our understanding of reality. We might be like flatlanders, living in a 2D world, unaware of the 3D reality around us. Implications for understanding God. The limitations of our senses have profound implications when we talk about understanding God or any higher power. If our senses can't even capture the full extent of the physical world, what hope do we have of grasping the nature of something that might be beyond all physicality? It's a humbling thought, one that should make us cautious about claiming to fully understand the divine. The sensory limitations. Only a fraction of reality. Remix 2. Our limited windows to the universe. Imagine living your entire life in a room with tinted windows. The colors you'd see would be distorted, lacking in the full spectrum of hues the world has to offer. This, in essence, is what our senses do to us. They are like tinted windows that offer us only a fraction of the universe's full spectrum. Sure, we can see a rainbow, but what about the ultraviolet and infrared light that lie beyond our perception? They're there, just as real as the colors we can see, yet forever invisible to our eyes. The iceberg metaphor. What lies beneath? If our senses are like the tip of an iceberg, then what grand mysteries lie beneath the water's surface? We are walking through life, blissfully unaware of ultrasonic frequencies that bats use for navigation or the magnetic fields that guide migratory birds. We're like tourists in a foreign country, armed with a basic phrasebook that covers hello, goodbye, and where's the bathroom, but leaves us clueless about the nuances of the local language. The flash drive analogy, dimensions beyond dimensions. Let's delve even deeper. Imagine handing a friend a flash drive that contains an entire book in PDF format. Your friend could dissect that flash drive down to its molecular structure and never find any trace of a book. The book exists, but not in a physical dimension we can touch or see. It's hidden in a series of 1S and 0S, accessible only when plugged into a complex system of hardware and software that we, humans, have ingeniously created. If we're capable of such feats, imagine what dimensions, logical, physical, or otherwise, could be out there, beyond our current understanding. Grasping the divine, a futile endeavor. So here we are, trying to comprehend the concept of a god or some form of higher power. If our understanding of our immediate reality is this limited, what audacity must we have to claim to understand the divine? It's akin to a fish in a pond musing about the nature of the ocean. We're confined, limited, and humbled by the vast unknowns that surround us. And perhaps that's exactly where we should be, forever seekers, never the all-knowing. The cognitive biases, filters on reality. We've discussed our sensory limitations, but what about our mental ones? Our brains come with their own set of filters, known as cognitive biases, that shape how we perceive reality. These biases aren't necessarily bad. They've evolved to help us make quick decisions and navigate complex social landscapes. But they can also cloud our judgment and make it difficult to see things objectively. Take confirmation bias, for instance. It's the tendency to seek out, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms our pre-existing beliefs. It's why two people can read the same religious text and come away with completely different interpretations. They're both looking for evidence that supports what they already believe. Or consider the anthropic principle, the idea that we see the universe in a way that allows for our existence. It's like saying, if the universe weren't like this, we wouldn't be here to observe it. But that doesn't necessarily mean the universe was designed for us. It's just a limitation on our ability to observe and understand it. These cognitive biases extend into our perceptions of God or higher powers as well. Whether we're aware of it or not, these biases influence how we interpret religious texts, how we engage in spiritual practices, and even how we pray. And while it's nearly impossible to eliminate these biases, being aware of them can make us more mindful consumers of religious and spiritual information. So, the next time you find yourself feeling certain about a religious or philosophical concept, take a step back and consider the biases that might be influencing your perception. Remember, the pursuit of understanding God or any higher power is not just about grappling with external complexities, but also about navigating the labyrinth of our own minds. The limits of language. Inadequate words for ineffable concepts. When we talk about God or any higher power, we're inevitably constrained by language. Words like omnipotent, transcendent, or even divine are merely human constructs, limited by cultural and historical contexts. Language, as a tool developed for human communication, is inherently ill-suited for describing the indescribable. Think about it. The word love means different things to different people, and that's a concept we all experience. Now try applying human words to an entity that's supposed to be beyond human comprehension. It's like trying to measure the weight of a cloud with a bathroom scale. Implications for religious texts. Given the inadequacy of language, it's worth considering the limitations this imposes on religious texts. Scripture, after all, is written in human language, replete with the same limitations as any other form of communication. When the Bible speaks of God as a king or the Quran describes paradise, we should recognize these as metaphorical, limited by the language and understanding of the time. This isn't to diminish the value or profundity of these texts. It's merely to acknowledge that they offer an interpretation, not a definitive description of divine concepts. The problem of cultural interpretation. Our understanding of God is not just influenced by language, but also by culture. Different societies have produced vastly different conceptions of the divine, shaped by historical events, social structures, and even geography. It raises the question, is there a universal God, or is the concept of God a cultural invention? To address this, we'll need to go beyond the Judeo-Christian concept of God that predominates in Western culture. We'll need to explore how different cultures and religions perceive the divine and consider what these varying perspectives can teach us. A journey of lifelong learning. If there's one takeaway from this chapter, it's that understanding God is not a destination, but a journey. With every scientific discovery, every philosophical argument, and every personal experience, our understanding evolves. We may never fully grasp the concept of God, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't strive for a deeper, more nuanced understanding. As we continue this exploration in the chapters to come, keep an open mind. Be willing to question, to doubt, and to explore, because the quest for understanding God is one of the most profoundly human journeys we can undertake. Chapter 5. Science and Spirituality. Bridging the Gap or Widening the Divide. Introduction. The age-old tension between science and spirituality has fascinated humanity for centuries. This relationship has been fraught with misunderstanding, ideological battles, and a constant quest for reconciliation. But why must there be a divide? Is it not possible that these two realms of human thought can coexist, each enriching the other? The aim of this chapter is to navigate this complex relationship, exploring areas where science and spirituality intersect, diverge, and challenge our understanding of reality. The quantum quandary, a meeting point or a breaking point. The realm of quantum mechanics offers a rich tapestry of phenomena that both baffle and captivate our imagination. Concepts such as quantum entanglement echo spiritual notions of interconnectedness and unity, leading some to argue that quantum mechanics provides a scientific basis for spirituality. In this viewpoint, the observer effect is cited as evidence for a conscious universe or even a creator. However, it is crucial to exercise caution when drawing such conclusions. Scientists often warn against misinterpreting or oversimplifying the mathematical rigor and empirical evidence that underpin quantum theories. These theories are not designed to offer moral or spiritual insights. While they may open doors to intriguing questions about the nature of reality, they also serve as cautionary tales against oversimplification or misapplication. The neuroscience of belief, biological determinism, or free will. Neuroscience offers another compelling interface between science and spirituality. Scientific studies have shown specific patterns of brain activity associated with religious experiences and beliefs. This has led to discussions about the neurological basis of spirituality and belief. Is our predisposition to spirituality merely a byproduct of neural activity? While it's tempting to reduce spirituality to biochemical processes, such a reductionist approach risks missing the richness and depth of spiritual experiences. Just because we can map the neural correlates of spiritual experiences doesn't mean we can fully explain them. Some argue that this biological basis does not negate the significance or authenticity of spiritual experiences, but rather offers a complementary lens through which we can understand them. Evolution versus creation, an irreconcilable difference? The debate over evolution and creationism has perhaps been one of the most publicly contentious issues at the intersection of science and spirituality. For some, the idea of evolution directly contradicts their spiritual beliefs, particularly if they adhere to a literal interpretation of religious texts. This ideological collision has led to public debates, legal battles, and even divides within communities. Yet, some religious scholars and scientists propose a more nuanced perspective, suggesting that evolution does not necessarily negate the concept of a creator. They argue that religious texts might be metaphorical narratives that aim to explain the world in terms that were understandable to people at the time they were written. Therefore, accepting the scientific evidence for evolution doesn't have to rejecting spiritual beliefs. It simply calls for a more nuanced interpretation of religious doctrines. The ethical implications of scientific discoveries. Advancements in science often bring a slew of ethical questions that challenge our spiritual and moral frameworks. From the gene-editing capabilities of CRISPR to the potential development of artificial intelligence that surpasses human intelligence, we are continuously pushed to re-evaluate our ethical boundaries. While these advancements hold the promise of solving some of humanity's most pressing problems, they also present dilemmas that don't have easy answers. Should we edit the genes of unborn children to eliminate diseases, or does that open the door to designer babies? Is it ethical to develop AI that can make decisions, or does that infringe on the domain of human free will and responsibility? These questions demand an interplay between science and spirituality, urging us to consult both empirical evidence and moral principles. Often, religious and spiritual teachings offer guidelines on the sanctity of life, the importance of free will, and the ethical treatment of other beings. These teachings can serve as a compass in the murky waters of scientific ethics, reminding us that technological capability is not a carte blanche for ethical recklessness. The environmental crisis, a scientific and spiritual urgency. Another pressing issue that sits at the intersection of science and spirituality is the environmental crisis. Science provides a clear picture of the devastating impact of human activity on the planet, from climate change to biodiversity loss. These are not just empirical problems, they are also deeply spiritual and ethical issues. Many religious and spiritual traditions emphasize the importance of stewarding the earth and living in harmony with nature. However, despite overwhelming scientific evidence, there is often resistance to acknowledging the severity of these issues or taking appropriate action. Here, spirituality can play a pivotal role. The sense of interconnectedness and responsibility that often comes with spiritual beliefs can inspire individuals and communities to take action. Whether it's adopting more sustainable lifestyles or advocating for policies that protect the environment, the synthesis of scientific understanding and spiritual responsibility can offer a powerful catalyst for change. Conclusion: an unfinished symphony. As we've explored in this chapter, the relationship between science and spirituality is far from simple. It's a dynamic interplay of questions and answers, challenges and insights, conflicts and synergies. Neither can fully explain the mysteries of existence or the complexities of the human condition. While science excels in deciphering the mechanics of the natural world, spirituality delves into the realms of purpose, ethics, and meaning. Both are integral to the human experience, and both have their limitations. The key lies in understanding how they can complement each other, creating a more holistic framework for exploring the deepest questions of existence. As our scientific knowledge expands, so too should our spiritual understanding. In this never-ending quest for understanding, both science and spirituality contribute to the unfinished symphony of human inquiry. Chapter 6: The Mystery of Consciousness. Introduction. Consciousness is an enigma that has puzzled philosophers, scientists, and thinkers for centuries. Is it merely the result of electrochemical reactions in our brains, or is it a phenomenon that points to something more profound? Theories range from the strictly scientific to the deeply spiritual. In this chapter, we will explore this intricate landscape, examining theories that seek to explain what consciousness is and how it might relate to the divine. We will also explore a new theory, pan-dimensional panpsychism, that might provide another dimension to our understanding of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness. The term hard problem of consciousness, coined by philosopher David Chalmers, refers to the question of why and how physical processes in the brain give rise to the subjective experience of being. While we have made significant progress in neuroscience, mapping out neural pathways and understanding biochemical reactions, the question of why these processes result in subjective experience remains unanswered. Could it be that consciousness is a fundamental aspect of the universe, akin to space and time? Or is it an emergent property of complex computational processes among neurons in the brain? Despite advances in both science and philosophy, the hard problem of consciousness remains an open question, a frontier that challenges the boundaries of what we know and what we believe. Is consciousness localized or non-localized? The debate over the localization of consciousness is as intriguing as it is divisive. Mainstream neuroscience posits that consciousness is localized in the brain, the result of complex interactions between neurons. On the flip side, various spiritual traditions and some emerging theories in quantum mechanics propose that consciousness is non-local. In this view, consciousness is a universal field, a non-local phenomenon that our brains merely tap into. The orchestrated objective reduction, OR theory, for instance, postulates that quantum processes could be integral in unlocking the mysteries of consciousness. While the debate is far from settled, these theories open new avenues for understanding the nature and origins of consciousness. Panpsychism, a bridge between science and spirituality. The theory of panpsychism posits that consciousness is a basic feature of the universe, intrinsic to every aspect of it. This is not as mystical as it sounds. Prominent scientists and philosophers are seriously considering it as a solution to the hard problem of consciousness. If consciousness is as fundamental as matter or energy, it opens the possibility that it is linked to the very fabric of the universe. This could indicate the presence of a higher form of reality or even a divine entity. Panpsychism challenges the materialistic view of the universe and pushes the boundaries of our current understanding, offering a potential bridge between science and spirituality. Pan-dimensional panpsychism, a new frontier. In the ongoing discourse about consciousness, a novel theory worth discussing is pan-dimensional panpsychism. Imagine your computer running a virtual machine, VM. For those unfamiliar with the term, a VM is a software simulation that emulates a different computer system within your existing hardware. Now, let's say this VM has its own operating system, applications, and data. To a casual observer, it looks like a separate entity, but it's entirely hosted on your physical computer. Here's the twist. Could consciousness function similarly? What if our experience of self-awareness is like a VM running on the cosmic hardware of the universe? In this framework, each of us could be akin to a complex software program interacting with others, yet all of us are part of a much larger system. In this context, our individual consciousness doesn't reside solely in our brains. It's a localized expression of something far more expansive and interconnected. It's like a VM that taps into the resources of the host computer but functions semi-independently. This theory raises the possibility that consciousness might be multidimensional, tapping into realities or planes of existence that we can't ordinarily perceive. It suggests that understanding the hardware specifications of the universe could provide insights into its software, including the enigmatic phenomenon of consciousness. It's an idea that sits at the exciting intersection of science, philosophy, and spirituality. Chapter 9. Busting the Myth of American Exceptionalism, a Historical and Ethical Reckoning. The Fallacy of American Exceptionalism. American exceptionalism is the belief that the United States is fundamentally different and inherently superior to other nations due to its history, culture, and democratic institutions. While a source of national pride for many, this notion can also serve to sanitize or altogether erase the ethical lapses, injustices, and atrocities committed in the name of American progress. Examining the United States history through an ethical lens reveals a more nuanced, often disturbing picture that challenges the myth of American exceptionalism. This isn't just a historical exercise, but a moral reckoning. By perpetuating the myth of exceptionalism, we run the risk of overlooking current injustices, thereby enabling their perpetuation. A genuine commitment to ethics and justice requires an honest evaluation of our past, even when it reveals uncomfortable truths. Colonialism and the suffering of indigenous populations. The ethical evils of colonialism. The colonization of America was predicated on the dispossession and annihilation of indigenous peoples. This was not a benign process, but a brutal campaign that led to the loss of life, land, and culture for countless indigenous communities. The ethos of colonial expansion was inherently capitalistic, driven by the desire for land, resources, and power. The destruction wrought on indigenous populations is not just a historical tragedy, but a moral catastrophe. Millions of lives were lost due to violence, disease, and dislocation. Sacred lands were desecrated, and vibrant cultures were nearly obliterated. This wasn't mere conquest, it was ethnocide. The ethical weight of this history must not be glossed over or excused by appeals to American exceptionalism. The ongoing struggle of indigenous rights. The consequences of colonialism continue to reverberate in the lives of indigenous peoples today. From the lack of representation to the continued struggle for land rights, the legacy of colonial oppression is far from over. While many Americans celebrate Thanksgiving, few reflect on the blood-soaked history that made their feasts possible. The ongoing challenges faced by indigenous communities, such as poverty, lack of access to quality healthcare, and cultural erosion, are not isolated issues, but rather the long-term consequences of systemic exploitation and neglect. Addressing these injustices is not just a matter of policy, but a moral imperative. Slavery and its long-lasting ethical implications, the atrocity of chattel slavery. The institution of slavery stands as one of the darkest chapters in American history, and yet its full implications are often sanitized or ignored. Slavery in America wasn't just forced labor, it was chattel slavery, where human beings were treated as property to be bought, sold, and disposed of at the will of their owners. This system was not an unfortunate blight, but a foundational element of the American economy. Chattel slavery wasn't just an economic enterprise, it was a profound moral failing. The system was maintained through unimaginable cruelties. Families were torn apart, individuals were subjected to physical and sexual abuse, and human life was devalued to the point of being considered expendable. The ethical enormity of this cannot be overstated, and its long-lasting effects continue to shape American society in ways both overt and insidious. The lingering stain of racial injustice. The abolition of slavery did not magically erase its ethical implications or its long-term effects. From Jim Crow laws to mass incarceration, the repercussions of America's original sin continue to manifest in systemic racism. While many would argue that America has made significant strides toward racial equality, the ethical lapse that allowed for the institution of slavery still casts a long shadow. Until this legacy is fully acknowledged and addressed, the myth of American exceptionalism remains an obstacle to true ethical progress. Marginalization of LGBTQ+ rights and xenophobia. Against migrants, the struggle for LGBTQ+ rights. While the United States has made some progress in recognizing LGBTQ+ rights, the road has been fraught with setbacks and opposition. Discriminatory laws, social stigmas, and hate crimes continue to plague the LGBTQ+ community. This isn't just a political issue. It's an ethical one that tests the integrity of American values. The struggle for LGBTQ+ rights exposes the limits of American exceptionalism, revealing a nation still grappling with basic questions of human dignity and equality. The discrimination faced by LGBTQ+ individuals isn't an anomaly, but part of a broader pattern of marginalization that challenges the narrative of American moral superiority. The ethical dilemma of immigration and xenophobia. The United States, often described as a nation of immigrants, has a complicated relationship with new arrivals, particularly those from marginalized communities. From the Chinese Exclusion Act to the Muslim travel ban, America's immigration policy has often been tinged with xenophobia. This isn't just a political issue, but a moral one. When we allow fear and prejudice to dictate policy, we compromise the ethical foundations upon which this country purports to stand. The mistreatment of migrants at the border, the separation of families, and the general climate of hostility towards immigrants are not just policy failings, but ethical ones. Conclusion: an ethical reckoning. The myth of American exceptionalism serves not just as a historical narrative, but as an ethical blind spot, obscuring the numerous injustices perpetrated in the name of progress and freedom. True ethical maturity as a nation requires a reckoning with these uncomfortable truths, not as an act of self-flagellation, but as a necessary step towards creating a more just, equitable, and ethical society.